"This one should be easy," she said, peering at me over her glasses and shuffling the stack of papers in her hands. "Mid-20s, living on her own in a flat on the second floor of a former nursing home." She looked up at me. "This one's jumpy, apparently. That's what the professor said when he came back from his assessment." I smiled weakly at her. "Should be a breeze, then." She grunted and dismissed me with a nod towards the office door behind me. I poked my head through the door of the flat and had a look around. The room was dark, with the curtains still drawn at 3 p.m. Her entire flat was one big room with a kitchenette in the corner. Parallel to this was a computer desk on wheels set up next to a sofa bed. I sat in a big comfy chair and thought about the person who lived here. But there wasn't much to go off. Her white walls were empty of photos or paintings, probably needing a deposit back in the long run. I leafed through some open letters and found a scrapbook of photos to look at. Lots of concert tickets and photos from holidays with friends. I felt a slight twinge of jealousy that I'd no longer be taking photos with friends in the same way again. It was about time to embrace this new life. I heard footsteps coming. I dropped the book, spreading photos across the floor, and glided over to the corner of the room. I made sure to stand in the slither of light coming from the curtain. I concentrated hard on my transformation, settling on a classic Victorian woman in a traditional black dress and veil. Not really accurate, but this was all about theatrics. Her key clicked in the lock. This was the moment I'd trained for. I closed my eyes and waited for the scream. I waited for an eternity, and nothing. I opened one eye and looked. There she was, face down on the bed, her bags dumped on the floor and headphones discarded next to her. She was snoring softly, fast asleep. My Victorian garb fell away as I lost all concentration. How had she missed me standing in the corner? I thought she was jumpy. I sank down to the floor with my head in my hands. She hadn't even noticed the scattered photos. After my initial meltdown, I rose up to check on her. She was still fast asleep. I moved over to her armchair and watched her. After 15 minutes, I sat down. After 30 minutes, I was almost asleep myself, my head sinking into my shoulder. She was asleep for hours. At 8 p.m, she showed signs of stirring. I quickly shifted to the foot of her bed and stood over her. No disguise this time, just my normal form made visible to her eyes. I figured I could stand to go back to basics. She opened her eyes and gasped. A slightly underwhelming response, but better than before. But then she checked the time and gasped again, leaping up off the bed. She was swearing under her breath, digging clothes off the floor and chucking them behind her. I waved my arms at her. "Hello!" But she wasn't paying any attention to me. She rifled through a bag on the floor and then suddenly stopped, falling back onto the floor into a sitting position, and laughed out loud. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I walked behind her and watched as she pulled out her phone to message someone. The text read, "Just woke up from a nap and panicked thinking it was 8 a.m, not 8 p.m. I'm not sure I'll make it to the end of the week." Frustrated, I slipped out of her flat and headed into the night. I drifted around the town. People wobbled around, glasses smashed, football chants could be heard in the distance. I settled in a booth in a pub that had strangely named itself Big Window. I stewed silently as I watched patrons pass by. I felt a sense of power as I noticed that my booth remained empty. Nobody knew I was there, but they must have sensed that these spots, prime spots next to the bar, were not to be occupied by the living. I twiddled my thumbs until the nightlife drew to a close. This time, I would cause a scene. I slipped out the pub with the last few die-hard punters and arrived back at the flat. I listened closely outside her room. Silence. Gingerly, I put my head through the door to take a look. I couldn't believe what met my eyes. She was still awake, still living her life at the witching hour, chopping fruit in her tiny kitchen and listening to something in headphones. No wonder she was falling asleep in the mid-afternoon. All that waiting for nothing. Anger bubbled up inside me. I needed her to be scared, shaking, crying, screaming. I lunged to her bookcase, knocking a row of books off the shelf onto the floor. I took a hold of the shelf, knocking it side to side. I looked over to her. She'd seen none of it. Her back was turned away, oblivious to any of the ruckus I'd created just meters away. I flew out of her bookcase, irritated. I had one more try. Just like before, I concentrated hard on transforming myself into something horrifying, morphing into a ragged beast covered in feathers, my hands replaced with gnarly taloned claws, my face featureless but uncanny. I stood still, waiting for her to turn around. She washed up, unaware of her immediate danger, moving around without fear. She turned to reach for the tea towel. I pounced. I screamed in anger, glory and satisfaction, and she screamed in fear, her hands flailing. I was euphoric. This was the best scare of my life. I knew nothing but to be terrifying in that moment. My ears stopped ringing and I looked back to see what had become of her, my claws still pinning her down to the floor. I expected to look at her frightened expression, but now I was the shocked one, to see she'd disappeared from under me. I heard movement behind me and turned to look. "You've passed," she said, pushing her glasses up as she smirked. What do you mean?" I asked, bewildered and breathless. Once again she looked at me over the top of her glasses. "You didn't know this was your final test?" This was Hard to Haunt, an original story written by Imogen Wheal, read by Deanna Matheson. Find Imogen's other links in the description box below, and for more short stories, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the YouTube channel. See you next time!